All right, maybe let's get things started. Good morning, afternoon, evening for those of you joining us from all around the world today. Really excited to have you here. Welcome to today's webinar on accelerating operational efficiency and training with digital twins. My name is Marty Yaskowicz. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Equilibrium. We are a digital consulting agency that specializes in end-to-end app and software implementation. Our experience spans more than 11 years in banking, retail, industry, and now virtual reality. And today I'm joined by our partners from Unity. We have Seth Gibson, Senior Solution Engineer for Industry. Say hello, Seth.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be here.
And Scott Hamilton. Scott is a business lead for Energy of the Americas with Unity as well.
Hey, everybody.
So
hope everyone can hear us okay.
Yeah, I hope so. Before we jump into it, if you have questions throughout, please throw them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that, and I'll keeping an eye on that, throwing some questions to the team as we go through it. But this team, Equilibrium and Unity, are really working together to revolutionize the workplace of the future through digital twins designed to upskill employees, mitigate risk, and reduce costs. It's really a win-win-win for business today. You know, this is a particularly interesting topic for me personally. What feels like a lifetime ago, I started my career at a software company in the Detroit area, building CD-ROM and CDI-based training programs for employees of Chrysler and General Motors. So as new cars rolled out into the dealerships, they were sending out these large, what looked like records and CDs to their employees, to their mechanics, to their managers, to their salespeople, to try and keep them informed and up to date with all the latest and greatest of what's happening in the vehicles in their showrooms. What you'll see today is the modern equivalent of that. Obviously, it's much sexier. It's much more interesting. It's using augmented and virtual reality to reduce cost, risk, and increase retention of key information. And in fact, training delivered in XR is retained 80% higher than traditional methods. And that's really what we're talking about today. So Scott and Seth are going to share some of the dynamic use cases and experiences with you today. But before we do that, Seth, before we dive into that, an important clarification for our audience today. Unity is a globally recognized gaming engine. So what are you guys doing in the business of digital twins, and why are they so relevant for industry today?
Yeah, that's a great question to kick off with. And the way we're going to do that is, so let's actually pull back a little bit from kind of, terms like game and digital twin or VR configurator. And let's look at kind of the umbrella that these all fall under. And the term we like to use is real-time 3D experience. And so if we start from there, we can actually look at all the components that go into creating these experiences and see how those map from, say, game to digital twin to industry use cases. For example, a multiplayer game, that uses networking, that uses a bunch of other technologies that if we map that into the business space, now we have multi-user collaboration. So different terminology, slightly different experiences and use cases, but overall it's that same underlying foundational technology that Unity is built on top of. Likewise, a very interesting thing that I think makes Unity a very, very compelling piece of software and technology for these use cases is that our DNA really is in lighter experiences like mobile games, web games, lower end desktops, which allows us to transition to VR and AR devices very well. And if we think about what's going on in the business and industry space, everybody wants to do work on site. So that means they want to be on mobile devices. They want to see real world interpretation. So they want to be in VR and XR, which again, Unity is always very good at. And lastly, I would say, just to kind of speak to that a little more, is because we're so familiar with things like mobile chipsets and embedded systems, that goes from a mobile game very easily to something like, think about the cluster in a car. Car chipsets nowadays are very similar to what we see in mobile devices. And in fact, there's a really cool little bit of Unity lore that I think is really compelling, because it shows that a lot of this push didn't come from us at Unity. It came from the industry. And so the story goes, there was an automotive executive one day who was watching one of his kids play a mobile game, and he saw the Unity logo and thought to himself, well, the hardware that's in these phones is the same as what we're going to be having in cars in a couple of years. So why can't I have this same class of experience, these same graphics and interactions that I'm seeing on the phone? Why can I not have that in the car? Which brings us to today, where I believe last year we announced a partnership with Mercedes-Benz, who will be using Unity to build their upcoming OS, I think, as of 2024 in all their vehicles. So next slide, please. And so if we start to focus more on the digital twins and what we're doing here, we like to look at digital twins and kind of a graded scale. And I don't want to jump too far into like the specifics of each one. But if you think about how we go from something like a virtual twin, which is really just kind of a rendered representation. It's just taking the 3D data, putting it on screen so that you can kind of see what that might look like in maybe in a real world setting or maybe just in a design setting, all the way up to what we call an autonomous twin. Again, these all still use that same technology, those same foundational features that we find in a game engine, everything from networking, from the ability to ingest data either in real time or from a disk or some other static source to that real-time rendering. And of course, we do provide all sorts of interaction, whether that's with a mouse, with the keyboard, with a controller, or from an XR device.
Awesome. Scott, what are the business applications of digital twins? Let's dig into that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Marty. I have garbage man going on today, so hopefully you guys can't hear that, but it'll be brief. Before I get into that, let me just back up a step and maybe share a little bit about Unity as a whole. We're a global organization, and if you think about this whole idea of engaging in Web 3.0 or real-time 3D or digital twin or metaverse, whatever term you want to call it, Unity becomes a great place to start because of the massive network that we have. When you think of our footprint, 70% of all mobile games are developed and powered by Unity. There are over 4 billion downloads a month that go on within Unity, and over 3,300 projects per day are started in Unity in 2022. We were founded in 2004. 2020, we went IPO, and I joined in January 21. When I joined, we had about 4,000 employees. And so you see that jump from 4 to 7,000. It's a series of strategic acquisitions and for enabling people to be able, put the tech in the hands of the creators is really what we're trying to go after. And 53 global offices. We just made an announcement that we're going to cut that in half. And a lot of people were like, "Oh my gosh!" But organizations as a whole are looking at real estate in a different way, and Unity is trying to be a leader in that space and making the most of our investments. As it pertains to industry, Seth mentioned automotive, but it's every single industry that's out there that's pulling us into, and we're also helping drive. Architectural engineering, construction, you see natural resources there. I lead energy sector, so in oil and gas and power utilities, renewables, mining, chemicals, all of it. But even beyond that, retail, pharmaceutical and life sciences, and that's led to a pretty significant growth from Unity. While we've got a strong core games side that continues to grow, we're seeing the enterprise or industry side just leapfrog and leapfrog and leapfrog. And so this 30 to 40% growth we've been seeing year over year, we're anticipating it to continue for a couple of years at least. But use cases, since I'm energy, I'll talk a little bit about that and how that works. We typically see, they're huge assets that are super, they've got a really long runtime. And so they want to innovate on the way that they manage and monitor them. And so when you think of rigs that are offshore, if they can eliminate some of the transportation of people out to the rigs, you're saving money. It's also a safety issue. And then if you can manage it remotely, you are optimizing the workload a little bit easier. Optimizing maintenance, right? You're able to do predictive and corrective maintenance in advance. You can get into machine learning, which allows you to do that predictive maintenance a little bit more clearly. So instead of being reactionary to an asset going down, you can kind of put some parameters around what you think might happen and get ahead of it a little bit. Improving workforce safety, as we mentioned, is a big part of that. And then maximizing the performance of those assets. But going to Seth's digital twin maturity model that he talked about, you can see those use cases continue to grow in each of those areas. What we talk about is really more of when you go down this path, you're deepening your relationship with the data at each step of the way. And so in one, it's virtual twin. You're doing design and reviews and product configuration, some training, which is a big part of that. And you get into connected twin, it's tying things like IoT data in or being able to monitor remotely. Things like smart factories come into play with that. And on through this stage, right? Getting into predictive, doing simulations, robotics gets integrated, smart alerts. And then, we've got a couple of customers that are chasing autonomous twin, but some of that tech is still, not quite there, right? So that's experimental in some natures.
Awesome. With that in mind, let's dive into some of these case studies, if you will. I think starting with the Vancouver International Airport here in my backyard. What's happening out at YVR, guys? And love to hear more about this.
Yeah, I'll start, Seth, and then you can jump in and talk about solution and results. But essentially, YVR, they had, when the pandemic hit, a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? YVR had the forethought and the vision to say this is a pause and not the end. And so we need to be prepared when people come back, and we need to give them a different experience. And so they started in 2019 actually, but 2020 is really where they doubled down, and they wanted to go after what they called situational awareness. And they wanted to be able to monitor passenger counts and gates and flight stations, idling cars in the parking area, to go after all of the use cases that we just talked about. It's been a really good run with them. They've showcased a lot of different areas, and they talk about it publicly. If you do some research, you'll find some videos on it from their CIO. But we dove into quite a few different scenarios, and as phases continue to grow. Seth, why don't you share a little bit about the direction we're headed with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, let's take a look at this in action, because, as the saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and hopefully a video is worth a whole conversation. And maybe we can spark some questions here. But so this is the actual simulation running. And to kind of go back to what we talked about at the beginning, this is why a game engine, quote unquote, is such a great piece of technology for something like this, because, this is all data that comes directly from the design. So you're not seeing, an artist recreation. You're literally seeing the design data for YVR that's been ported into Unity and is now being rendered just like we would render any other sort of game asset. So say this was like a level in your favorite fantasy game or something like that. But what we've done is we've taken the real world, brought that into the virtual, and I believe this is 1-to-1 scale. And so here you can kind of see an overview of sort of the visual fidelity we're able to go with that, also the sense of scale and realism. But as well, what we're able to do now is we're able to add layers of interactivity on top of this that obviously you don't get in the real world. And it provides a whole new way to kind of interact with and manage your data and your scenarios. So if we take a look at some of those specifically, the first thing we have is on the next slide is what we call the operational awareness overview. And so this is kind of where we started from. We sat with YVR, and as Scott mentioned, operational awareness was really one of the big things that they wanted. But part of our job at Unity is to dig down into that and see what does that mean, and then to find opportunities for where our technology is really gonna make that shine, really gonna like enhance the workflow, or maybe even provide workflows and opportunities for problem solving and troubleshooting that weren't possible before. So as you see, some of the goals they came back to us with were things like real-time visualization, simulation, data ingestion. And the really interesting thing about those is as I keep saying, these are all technologies that already exist in Unity. But the neat thing about what we're able to do with Unity is we're able to go from something like a game where data ingestion and simulation might actually come from artist created data. So if you think about, say, an animated character in a video game or an animated environment, that's all pre-created. Whereas in a situation like this, we're actually taking in real world telemetry and then visualizing that and simulating it against that with minimal changes to the underlying technology. So on the next slide, we can start looking at some of the specific features we built into that. And we started with what we call this whole technology is called the ESG Performance Hub. So as you can probably imagine, something like an airport has a very, very big footprint, and we want to be able to kind of minimize and optimize things like the carbon footprint, things like GHGs, the greenhouse gases. So all of those things that we're concerned about with ESG. And so we start from the system view. What the system view does is it provides a very, very quick way for us to drill down into a specific system we might want to see. So what you see here is, you see a collection of, we've aggregated all the data into collections. So you might have one collection that is the facilities. You might have a collection that's the flight lines. You might have a collection that's the fleet. And when we say fleet, we mean everything from the incoming and outgoing flights all the way down to the smallest vehicle that might be on the runway. So something like a luggage tug or something like that. And what you can do is you can toggle those on and off, and then really start to get into the specifics of any one system. So if we go to the next slide, we could take a look at what we call the fleet view. And again, the fleet view just lets you really dive into, like I said, the definition of fleet is any vehicle that's on the flight line that's doing work. So here we have a picture of a plane. But as I mentioned, it could be a plane, it could be a food cart, it could be a luggage cart, it could be a maintenance vehicle, it could be, a smaller plane. Really, anything that's kind of on the move in YVR, we can visualize. And the really cool thing about this again is these are not driven by artist created content. They're not driven by animation. They're not driven by static keyframes, as we would say. They're driven by the real time telemetry that's dictating, when a plane is landing or taking off, or what the maintenance schedule of a certain vehicle looks like.
Awesome.
Next slide, please.
I think that's it.
Yeah, just a couple of questions before we move off YVR. Fascinating case study, amazing fidelity. I mean, I think anybody watching this has got to be in awe of that. As it pertains to the digital twins maturity model, though, fellas, where did YVR enter, and what did they do first? How do you tackle this? It seems like a massive project.
That's a good question. Yeah, the challenge that they had was that a lot of their technology was dated, right? And so you're talking 70s and 80s type systems, and so none of that is really digitized. And so we had to actually do a scan of the entire airport, and then bring that into the editor. And so that was the first step, was getting the model. And then as you go on, we talked about the maturity model previously, right? You're deepening your relationship with the data every step of the way. So let's start with a system and a point. Seth mentioned facilities. So there's, thousands of lights in the terminal, and the maintenance crew needs to know which ones are out and when they're out. And so they're all running on IoT sensors. We basically took a feed in from the IoT sensors, and now you've got that data in real time saying, oh, light number 73 and gate 24 is out. Go directly to that and do not pass go. So it gave them an ability to kind of hone in on a specific area and get ahead of ahead of it, which was kind of nice. And then as they go on, right, we did the fleet maintenance and other things. We integrated different systems into the visualization.
Awesome.
Seth?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it there. And I think the goal is actually to maybe get to that predictive level, what we call the level 5 twin, where not only are we ingesting data and simulating, but we're also using, AI and machine learning to analyze trends and maybe kind of get in front of bottlenecks or issues that might come up in the future. So.
Yeah, just following on to that, what were some of the KPIs and results they were tracking and saw business-wise?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like you said, if we go back to those goals, I think from the beginning, we weren't really sure, and this is kind of where we like to do a thing at Unity called envisioning. So where we kind of sit with the stakeholder, rather than come in and say, hey, we're going to tell you what to do. It's more like, no, let's see what you like to do. And that's actually how we got to something like the system view and the fleet view is, they kind of looked at all their operations and said, okay, well, where do we see the most opportunity for something like this to really kind of really streamline our workflow? So, you think about something like the fleet view. I mean, that's pretty much the core of an airport, right? And so to them, being able to manage that, being able to visualize that, being able to, and again, at some point get to that level 5 level of predictive maintenance for the fleet view, I'd say for their whole actual running fleet, I'd say it was probably a huge KPI. So
yeah, the other one is,
but
a couple others, this idea of notifications, right? So they were able to get a little bit ahead of the idea of a maintenance issue that was going on because they got an alert just saying something was out, or they could see it in a visual perspective. But one of the other cool things that was about this, right, when you think of diversity, inclusion, and equity, right, and this whole idea of the Indigenous peoples within Canada and across the various places where they're seeing the opportunity to train and go up to speed, this created a tool that allowed them to bring a higher education, if you will, or upskill some Indigenous people a little bit faster. And I believe they've already reached like a 20% milestone in this area to retool and bring up to a higher level some of the folks that are in that area.
Oh.
So there's a lot of the intangibles, right, that are out there as well.
For sure, that's phenomenal. You talked about level 5. What does level 5 look like, at an international airport or a place like YVR? Like how predictive is that getting, and how deep does it go into the facility and all the fleet and everything else?
Seth,
Yeah.
you want to grab it or you want me to take it?
I mean, I can start and you can fill in. I mean, and I don't want to make any promises for YVR or it's not like we're going to solve all your travel problems. I mean, I'd love that as much as I travel, but you think about that, right? I mean, you think about maybe what's happened in the last couple of years as far as, we'll say lags in travel, flights getting canceled, things like that, so being able to kind of look at those trends, because you have all that data, right? So being able to maybe analyze those trends a little closer and then maybe being able to throw them into something like a machine learning hopper that can kind of find, these areas where, like I said, we're going to have a bottleneck here. Because of X, Y happened and we'd like to get in front of that. I think that's one way where you might see that. So like I said, I don't want to promise a better travel experience yet, but if you use your imagination a little bit, I think you can sort of extrapolate, right?
Well, and I think like even as a traveler going to the airport, right, that experience comes to you in a better way as well. They're like, oh, actually, we're monitoring traffic within the airport, so watch out. Your flight has been whatever, right? You get text messages today, but what if you could have it on an interactive app that allows you to do that? But to kind of skip into a different industry, if you will, on level 5, going back to automotive, who they've been playing with this stuff for years. We have a customer, Hyundai, which we announced at the end of the year, that's going after the first digital factory. And so what they're trying to do is leverage it digital first before they do a physical plant. And so that allows them to explore new tech within the plant and configuration of the lines before they get there. But even beyond that, as a consumer going into that factory, I can actually configure my car in the lobby and then hang out and do some things with them. And that line is assembling my car as I go. And in a couple of hours, I've got my custom car coming off the line. Is the goals of that level 5.
That's crazy.
So it's pretty, that's a pretty intense level 5 scenario.
Unbelievable. Seth, you moved off the airport pretty quickly, but I've got 2 flights in the next 2 weeks, and I'm gonna get there by car. So I'm expecting a perfect experience. If I don't, I'm gonna be reaching out to you. I'm reaching out.
Yeah, you want to email Scott.Hamilton at.
Okay, not just, I won't hold you to it just yet. I know they're not at level 5 yet, but they're getting there. So excited that my airport in my yard is going to be one of the first ones using this kind of technology, because it's phenomenal.
And they are one of the first globally, by the way, that are going this deep within it. There's been some others like in Seoul, I think the airport over there was trying to go after some stuff, but because they were at CES sharing some of it. But,
awesome.
But when I dug in and asked them about it, they're like, "Oh, we're at level 1-ish, kind of, right?" Like it's very intentional, right? You have to go after it in a very intentional way.
For sure. All right, let's move on to our second use case. So this is SLB Energy.
Yeah, the artist formerly known as Schlumberger. SLB is the new branding for Schlumberger. You won't. We were joking the other day with someone, and they said, "Oh, I just said it. Now I owe my boss $10." Right? So even internally, they're still making the error of saying Schlumberger. SLB is an EPC in the oil and gas industry, so they manage facilities for the big integrated producers like Exxon or Chevron or Shell or whomever. And in addition to managing it physically, they also use software to help automate some of the processes within there. And so they use us in a variety of ways with their tech, but also in this concept of digital twin. We're helping them take it to a next level. They have some software that does management, and they use some old visualization tools. And what they've done is they've upgraded Unity as the visualization piece in one area. In this particular case, we're talking about ingestion and storage, and then integration of data data sources to the twin, which they'll mostly do. But that ingestion or transformation of the asset into a place to manage it and store it, as well as the visualization backside. So Unity thinks digital twin as a workflow. And it's ingest, store, optimize with different data, deploy out to a device of some sort to meet the demands of an end user, and so it's various places where we can dive in. We don't have to own the entire stack. We take advantage of an ecosystem of investments that have already been made. But here at SLB, they wanted to leverage us to help them with ingestion and then visualization piece. The goals were threefold. They wanted to, this is a remote location, right? That you have to intentionally go there, and maybe you've never been there before. And so when they have people coming in, they want to try to get them up to speed a little bit more quickly. So to your point of using VR for training, they would put someone in a headset and give them the experience of being at this facility. Now I know what buildings are there and where my locker room is and how I go to different places. And so that's kind of one example. The second piece of this is the actual assets that are on site. and tracking and knowing what is where. So they're using metadata to show the actual pump or container or whatever it is that's out there, and they're validating that it's on site with that. So you can actually say, oh, I believe it's pump 759, right? And then you look and it's there. But the third and the biggest one that we wanted to get into was kind of that level 2 twin, where you're integrating data to leverage it for maintenance and operations. And so we did a tie-in of IoT data. And Seth, I'll let you jump into it a little bit more. But this is taking into the next generation.
Yeah, and it's always cool to be able to talk about this, because just another piece of Unity lore. So SLB, then Schlumberger, was actually one of the first big engagements we made as an industry group. In fact, this was probably almost 5 years ago when I personally was fresh off the lot at Unity, and so they were one of my first big customers. And so it's really cool to see that we've been able to continue that relationship with them. And that, I think, speaks to how we like to kind of do business at Unity. We're not going to just kind of parachute in and drop a solution in your lap. We want to be with you in it for the long haul and really, really help you get to whatever that end goal you're trying to get to is. And so one of the neat things about how we were able to leverage, again, going back to, why a game engine, one of the things we were able to leverage here is that to speak to what Scott was saying about trying to remove that barrier to entry, we didn't really want people to have to worry about, oh goodness, how do I learn a whole new system? Do I have the right hardware? Do I have, is my computer going to be able to handle this? So we were actually able to provide this as both, as actually three things, as a web application, a mobile application, and an XR application. And so at any time, you could have anybody in any one of these platforms. And because the Accelerate Solutions Group has a lot of good experience designing very simplified UIs for web experiences, for mobile games, they were able to leverage that experience, bring that into this industrial space, and say, okay, well, how do we remove that barrier to entry? How do we reduce that friction? And what you see here is something that anybody could just pick up and dive into, because there's no special controls, there's no special hardware. It's just you click on something, you dive in, you click on something else, and there you go.
Yeah, and so some of the secondary goals that you see in there were part of the solution that we were going after. They're trying to increase production with these things, which is obvious. They want to make operations sustainable. There also is an opportunity to extend the life, right? If you can get into the predictive side of the maintenance, it doesn't take as much toll on it when it breaks down if you can fix it before it. It's like the timing chain in your car, right? At 80,000 miles. Also reducing the carbon footprint and managing their assets from a global perspective. You saw a gentleman in the back office working with one of the field techs out there. So, it created a nice opportunity for them to go after some stuff.
What is just before we get off SLB? What is the plan long term for the project? Like, what more do they want to add to it? How advanced are they imagining or seeing it?
Yeah. So what is happening with next steps? This is not a fully scaled production application, right? This was an opportunity to test out the IoT integration piece to prove out this optimization of work within the maintenance area. So the plan is to scale it, right? They take it to the next level and say, okay, this is a fully integrated solution with more than one data source integrated into it. So you can have, XYZ use cases rather than just X and Y use cases. And so how do you do that? You have to have a platform that it can sit on and an infrastructure across the organization that can take not only just this asset in, but assets from other parts of the globe to be able to manage them in a single place. So that idea of ingesting and storing so that you can make it accessible to whomever you would need to, and then can I have many of them be ingested and stored in there, is the idea of a platform. And so we're in the process of building that out with them to allow them to do this with not just this facility in a remote jungle, but any facility that they have with any customer.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, if folks in the audience watching it at home or at their office have any questions, by all means, throw them in the chat. I've got several more as we kind of get toward the end today, fellas. And I think the biggest one is, like, as companies build in this space and work more in this space, they're creating a lot of assets and need to store them. Like, how is Unity helping solve that?
Seth?
Yeah, so actually, this is something we've been working on for quite a while, and that's everything from acquiring, say, our own digital asset management companies. So things like CRMs. We acquired a company called Plastic SCM, which for the engineers out there, you're probably familiar with source control, version control. So we have our own revision control system. We're looking at either acquiring or developing our own content management system, and as well we're developing a platform that is actually a 3D asset management system, and it's kind of backed by our own cloud solution, kind of backed by all of our knowledge that we have from managing 3D assets from games, everything from small mobile games all the way up to AAA games to giant VFX productions. So I would say that's probably that's probably something that we're looking at very closely. We will have some more to talk about that very soon. I don't know, Scott, if you want to kind of fill in some of those details that I'm scared to fill in, because again, I'm trying to not make too many promises.
Not committing to anything, are you?
Yeah.
Well, so and the idea, Marty, is that there's a new way of interacting with software and with data. And so Unity's goal is to not take your data into a silo and have you beg, borrow, and steal to get it back from us. It's to allow you to free your data to be able to use it across any platform. And so it's more of a calls-based cloud platform, right? When people say, oh, another cloud platform, I'm going to get it. Our goal is not to try to get you into that. It's just tools and widgets, if you will, to allow you to kind of assemble and piece things together. We like to think of it like clay, where you can kind of customize it however you want, but that's coming in a little more structured format where you can just pick and choose more of I don't even want to say power apps, right? From a Microsoft perspective, to kind of put a correlation there where you can take chunkets of code and create functionality, but that's the general concept.
Awesome. Mike in the chat has a question. At YVR Airport, can they or have they set up alerts in the system? Example, monitoring if planes or trucks are in the wrong location.
Yeah, they've started it, and there's a plan to go deeper with it. And today there's a lot of it with the cars in the pickup zone. And so if there's a car idling in a location for too long, it's represented as a not a 1979 Toyota Corolla, but maybe a box, right? A car that's shaped box. And so they're able to say that thing's been sitting there for more than X number of minutes, whatever their parameters are, and then they can send someone from security over there and go take a look at it. And that's moving onto the planes. You saw the ESG side of it, where they're actually showing some of the sorry about that, some of the planes coming in, but they can see what they're putting off from a greenhouse gas emissions and advise them to perform differently on their landing and their approach.
Yeah, it seems like there's a big investment to kind of get into this space. So it's a two-part question for you both, but what was the transition like for Unity moving from, a gaming system into, the digital twin industry, heavy kind of piece of this, but also what are you seeing in your clients who are starting to adopt this for the first time, and what are the challenges that they are perhaps kind of coming up against? That's
I was going to say, I'll let you know when we get there.
Two-parter there. Feel free.
Well, so you think of this as and I don't want to call it a revolution, but when you remember back in the day of the cloud, when you were deploying workloads to the cloud, every day there was something new or a different way of doing it that was going on. And there was a time where you oh, am I doing it right? I got to change, I got to pivot. We're kind of in that mode right now, right? So you're seeing this situation where it's becoming more and more and more of a way of working, and people are going after it. And so problems are being solved in different ways at different times. But there's some challenges that are still out there that haven't been solved yet. And we're trying to get after those. But the short answer is that I go back to this idea of it's intentional, right? You have to actually make a plan. We were talking about ingestion of photogrammetry the other day, and simple, right? Yeah. But the first step is starting with do I get the data in a consistent way from my providers all the time? And if I'm doing that, then it makes it a little bit easier to create that pipeline to ingest that photogrammetry data. And so it's just like any other software. I don't want to compare us to an SAP, but if you're going to go after SAP, right, that's a plan, it's an investment, it's a change to the way that you're doing things, right? And you're thinking about data in a different way. And you're, I've got some customers that I've talked to quite a bit, and one of the terms that's been tossed around is a new way of working, right, or a visual way of working. And that's really kind of what we're talking about here, is that we're changing the processes by which people engage with data.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would also say on the production side, one of the really, really interesting things that I think we had to contend with at Unity was, coming from gaming, looking at the scale of a game production, it's much different from an industrial production. There's a different sense of urgency almost for example, like I mentioned, I have a background in AAA games, and it's not uncommon to be on a project for say 2 to 5 to 10 years. Whereas, some of these industry teams we engage with, they're coming to us and saying, hey, we've got a 3-month timeline and this is going to inform a several $1 million decision, right? So it was one of those, maybe the services that we have for games aren't quite ideal for what some of those teams are looking for. So maybe they need different SLAs. Maybe they need different points of contact. Maybe, they need a different support structure. So I would say that's probably one of the big differences that we saw on the production and technical side for sure.
Yeah. I would imagine there's a lot more scrutiny around ROI from the gamers versus the business folks who are writing the checks for this. What do you think is the biggest measure of ROI that your clients are seeing, or what is the thing that they're most, keeping them up at night? And it's a recession, small R recession, we're not sure, but like there has to be a lot of scrutiny on this investment. How are they measuring the success of it?
Oh, I can answer that easily. Human lives. I mean, just to cut right to the chase. This is why we do things like virtual training. And in fact, we've engaged with us, at least one client I can think of that was, another one of my very early cases at Unity where, their impetus was, hey, we've had training accidents that have resulted in, fatalities because we just weren't able to train people on the hardware. And that sounds like kind of a cold, callous way to look at it. But in a lot of cases, it's kind of tricky to spin up those situations right in the real world. So being able to present to them a system where they can literally dial in any kind of emergency situation, any sort of hazardous case that they could possibly think of, and maybe getting as we get back to that idea of predictive, maybe something that the system thinks up, and being able to train people on that. Now you have people showing up day one knowing exactly how to deal with those situations, and that absolutely is going to cut down on those accidents.
Yeah, and I might add to that is on the energy side of it, right? Obviously, health safety is a big part of that as well, but ESG, which we mentioned a little bit on the Vancouver airport side, is a big part of the energy side of it, where they are under scrutiny to reduce carbon output and transform to new energy. And so how do you leverage these tools to do that? Well, one of our customers was talking about, you're creating efficiencies in our model, which actually increases our profit, which allows us to put more money toward R&D on new energy. And so we were like, oh, for sure, that's just it. But like, that's a reality, right? I mean, you're talking about, I need to free up money it's going to be a big investment to go after new energy. And we're not, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It takes time and effort and energy. And so how do you allow organizations to free up cash to go after it? And this is one way of doing that. There's others, right? You're talking about optimization of burn of generators. You're talking about lowering the carbon emissions for concrete manufacturing or high carbon output processes in general. I mentioned healthcare. We work with a variety of healthcare organizations, but like think about a children's hospital, right? Where they're talking about a teeny tiny little baby, right? That they're dealing with in NICU, for example. Maybe we can take that heart and show it to a larger size and allow them to create efficiencies around how they would do surgeries around that. That's actually something that's happening at a children's hospital we're working with. So we're actually saving lives that way too. Funny story, if I may, for a second. My daughter, not funny, but funny at the same time, broke her hip last summer. And she actually broke the iliac crest, which is really hard to do. It's the butterfly wings on your thing right there. We were on vacation, which is even better. So we were in the hospital, and the doctor came up to me and he's like, hey, I got this CAT scan that I've got. It's got a 3D image of here. And I said, 3D? What? So we started chatting, and I said, hey, wouldn't it be great if you had that in a simulation where you could practice the surgery over and over again? He's like, oh my gosh, I could increase the velocity with which I do the surgery. I could reduce the size of the scar. Yeah. And in the background, my daughter's like, seriously, Dad, right now? But the use cases go across many industries, and it's just really cool to see some of the transformation that's out there.
Scott, I'd be a terrible host if I didn't ask how is the daughter today? How is she doing? Recovery well?
She's great, man. She is a trooper. Yeah, it went really, really well. The doctor in Denver Health actually did a fantastic job, and they're not yet a customer, but I'm working on it. She had great spirits throughout the whole thing, and was literally walking in a couple of weeks.
Oh,
which
wow.
was amazing.
That's fantastic. We talked a little about organizations going from sort of 0 to 1. What about those ones trying to make the challenge, from midpoint sort of to that upper tier? What kind of things should our listeners be aware of for, some of the next generation? Once they've kind of gotten their foot in the water here, how do they get to that next level? What are the challenges that they should be aware of?
I'll grab one, Seth, and then you can jump in if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah.
So I was talking to a customer about machine learning the other day and doing predictive maintenance, and they were like, I want to try to predict when this turbine's going to fail, right? The motor on a wind turbine for wind farms. And we get to talking about, like, at a certain time of the year, during a certain humidity or a certain temperature or what have you, you want to be able to say that part is going to go out and let's get some on back order, get them in people's hands so they can go quickly. And we got to talking about the attributes that they would need in order to run machine learning algorithm to figure out what it was. And they realized that they weren't even sure, right, what attributes they needed. And they had like two, and we're not sure that we can do that. We'd have to run an analysis on the data to see if it even solves your problem, right? So when you think about that predictive maintenance side of things and the variety of attributes that you would need in order to make that predictive maintenance, I think those are areas where people need to, they're going to have aha moments of, I'm not even ready yet.
Yeah, I would say on the technical side, this is something that a lot of customers come to us with. So they'll have this legacy system, for example, that kind of does what they need it to do, but maybe not as well. And they're actually kind of hitting the ceiling on, what they're able to do. And they're realizing, oh, okay, well, we're not ever going to be able to make that next jump with, what we have now. So a lot of our conversation is, well, with a little bit of investment, with some conversation, with some back and forth, Unity can actually take you to that next level. So going back to SLB, for example, one of the first things that they approached us for was they do subsurface surveys, and the data they have is very similar to a CAT scan. It's kind of like slices of just of a big subsurface area. And they were using a very, very custom built piece of software. I think SLB was one of the only customers this company had. And so we said, well, give us some time, give us some specs, give us your data set. And we could probably, we'd probably enable you to see larger data sets with better fidelity and in real time. So I would say that's definitely something to think about, is that, where are you right now? What are you hitting a ceiling? Is there a wall? Is there something that's keeping you from going to that next level? And understand that real-time 3D technology can probably, kind of help you get through that wall and, into the greener pastures beyond. So and like I said, it's a conversation, it's a back and forth, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it probably will happen. Yeah.
So Seth and Scott, we are literally saving lives and the planet at the same time. Is there anything this can't do? Is there anything that we should be aware of that we can't solve for here?
I'm sure that there's plenty of things that we can't solve.
As a developer, as somebody who's been on Unity for 10 years and has used it for games and for non-business applications, and now is out there seeing what other people are doing, my answer is going to have to be, if there's enough time to really just kind of sit down, tackle the problem, get a good spec. It's hard to say no. Let's put it that way.
Well, so here's one that I was thinking about, is the physics side of it, right? Unity is not a physics engine. So while we have a baseline functionality around physics and we can do simulations of stuff, a lot of times when you talk about somebody who wants to run componentry around physics, they're using a different solution, right? Like Algorix or ANSYS or something like that. And one of the things that Unity does to enhance that is we help other software kind of go to the superpower level, right? Where the visualization gets a little bit better, where the democratization gets a little better. So we'll take those physics scenarios and we'll actually embed them into our engine and allow people to use them and interact with them. So while we can't do that, that's again taking advantage of the ecosystem, right? There's a variety of tools and pieces that are out there that we can kind of, we're the connective tissue, if you will.
Fascinating. It's amazing. It's amazing what we're all building here together. Very, very exciting stuff. I think we don't have any more questions in the chat. I think we're probably going to wrap it up there for today. I just want to say a really big thank you to both Scott and Seth from Unity, tremendous partners of ours. We're so excited for this partnership, as well as obviously all of our viewers and listeners who joined in today or are going to watch the replay of this in video format. It'll be distributed. I also wanted to invite any of our audience who may be attending the Augmented World Expo, AWE, in a couple weeks in Santa Clara to come visit the Equilibrium booth. Unity is going to be there. We'll be there. We can have a chat, a visit.
I'll be there.
have a quick demo. Scott and I will be there together, obviously, and really excited to chat more about this and show folks out there some of the exciting things. As well, if you want more information or to book a meeting, please reach out to Hassan Iftikhar. He's our practice lead at Equilibrium in this space. His information was found on that final slide that was up for a lot of the time. So hopefully you scratch that down, or visit equilibrium.com for more information, and we'll get you to the right place. But again, thanks to our friends Seth and Scott, and for all of you chiming in today. And have yourself a great Wednesday. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank